What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. And today we're talking college football DFS ahead of week 5. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We are brought to you by Bet365. They have a deal for those of you in Kentucky, Ohio, New Jersey, Virginia, Iowa, Colorado, Louisiana, Indiana, Arizona, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. What you'll do is click the link below, make your first deposit, then bet $5 on any game. Could be a side, could be a total. Whether it wins or loses, you will get $200 in the form of bonus bets. You must be 21 or older to play, 18 in Kentucky. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, week 5, main slate, DraftKings and FanDuel. Here is our data usage tool. We'll talk about all of the player opportunity stuff in the video. Team level stuff is up at the top. You get pass rate, pace, Vegas stuff, defensive matchups. It is all there. If you want access to this, it is available on Stochastic along with our industry-leading projections, along with our ownership, our Sims tool. I will make a personal guarantee no one is working harder than us. That is why we have the best product. Links are below if you would like to test it out. I don't think you'll regret it. Let's kick this off with a somewhat mediocre game, Kentucky versus Ole Miss. Kentucky's taken a lot of money, so perhaps this is the chance to be better. It's not like Ole Miss has really played any significant competition. Wake Forest, probably their most difficult game. Very different stylistic pace. Kentucky's 129th, Mississippi's 8th. Spread in the game is 16 points in favor of Ole Miss. The total is 53, so kind of parked right in the middle of those two paces. Pass rate, Kentucky is currently throwing the ball 38.5% of the time. Ole Miss is at 45.3. When I ran the projections earlier this week, I was shocked by how in play Brock Vandagriff is. He's 5K flat on DraftKings. We've basically had 2 consecutive weeks now where almost every quarterback is too expensive. And we sort of had like a 7K floor on quarterbacks outside of, I don't know, like Max Brosmer at like 6.5. Just no one you would ever consider playing at that price. Those type of quarterbacks were at like 6.5K, which is Brock Vandagriff. But this week they made a change. They lowered the pricing floor for starting quarterbacks and put these really bad guys at like 5K, which now they're semi-playable. And this is really gross because Brock Vandagriff is averaging 20.5 attempts per game. Part of that is because he got benched in the game. He's shy of 140 yards through the air. He does run a little bit, 53 yards. All I'll say is their implied team total is bad. It's 18.5. He still projects decent at this implied team total if you think this game is closer because Ole Miss has played nobody to date in Kentucky. They came off a competitive game against Georgia. They've been in much better spots than Ole Miss. If you think it's within 16, Vandagriff is a decent play. He is a salary saver that is at least live. In the backfield, still no Chip Trayanum, so Demi Sumo-Karngbai is going to handle most of the work. Their games have been semi-competitive lately. Jamarian Wilcox has been a change of pace. Jason Patterson has been out. Don't think we see him. But Sumo-Karngbai has, depending on how game script goes, the chance to touch the ball like 12 to 15 times, or he has the chance to go over 20 if UK keeps this a little closer than we might think. At receiver, there's not really too much to write home about. It's basically just Dane Key, Berrien Brown every single play, Jamori Macklin at like 60, 65% of the routes, and whatever he's not doing, Fred Ferrier cleans that up at like 35%. Tight end is a nasty, nasty rotation. Dane Key is somewhat interesting with his 34% target share. He's not even the most expensive receiver on this team, which is just a mishap by DraftKings. So maybe you could get to Dane Key. They're all really cheap on FanDuel, but as you guys know, FanDuel is very, very loose in terms of pricing. I'm not sure I'm still getting any of these guys over there. But yeah, Kentucky more in play than I thought. I'm actually likely to play a sprinkling of Brock Vandagriff and Demi Sumo-Karngbai as well as Dane Key. On the Ole Miss side, there are some values on this slate. So you can play Jackson Dart. He is averaging an absurd 388.5 passing yards per game on just 30 attempts. He has 90 rushing yards. We know he can run. He's just very expensive. He doesn't project as one of the top values, but when you're running Sims, when you're running optimizers, whatever it is you guys use individually, Dart's going to come up some, I imagine, just because he has a very high raw point projection. Kentucky plays slow. They don't have a bad defense, so that is somewhat concerning. This is by far their toughest matchup to date. But, I mean, Dart has a long time starting. You can go back multiple years now and see what he's done. He's a completely fine play if he's the priority for you. I think he's going to be more of like a sprinkle for me in 150 sets. In the backfield, Henry Parrish has sort of iced all the other backs in this backfield, which is hilarious because everyone in the beginning of the season was drafting Rashad Amos, like the Miami, Ohio transfer. Your guy coming from the MAC really had a chance in this offense. Ulysses Bentley's been iced, which is kind of the biggest surprise here. For Parrish, he did have 22 carries in, I guess, their most competitive game. So you do have to do a little bit of projecting here with this team. I think he's the best one to use. In that contest, he had 28 touches, 6 targets, 22 carries. We're projecting him ahead of the field right now, and that's just because I don't think anyone realizes who Ole Miss has played so far. And generally, I think the field and our competitors do a very bad job of adjusting players when they've been in blowouts. We really try to factor in what teams have done in competitive games, in games where maybe it's a blowout, but what has a team done while it's competitive? You're not going to see a lot of states doing that. Parrish, I think, in play at 6.8K for those reasons. If you think Ole Miss blows him out, then you'll see Matt Jones, Bentley, Dominique Thomas, Amos come into the game. One wrinkle, they use JJ Pegues, their defensive lineman, as a goal line back. He comes in and he slams into the back of the O-line when they're on the 1 yard line. He's not on the player pool, obviously. We have that production assigned to Logan Diggs, who is out of this game. Obviously, it's not going to be enough where you would get Logan Diggs in your lineups, but it is enough where you see the projection coming in a little lower for Henry Parrish and the other backs. So just know we've taken care of that. It isn't a factor in our projections. The JJ Pegues goal line runs are in there. Receiving game is basically 3 guys: Trey Harris, Antwain Wells, Jordan Watkins. Watkins has been a little limited, so you have seen Caden Lee play some. His routes have dropped significantly. I think your 3 wide receiver set is exactly who he just mentioned. And Trey Harris has one of the most absurd roles in football right now. He's just a locked-in absolute stud. Stacks are really expensive, but definitely want to play him. Antwain Wells, I mean, he's coming off an 83% route share. Again, Caden Lee saw his routes drop. When you saw Watkins hurt, they were up at like 80%. Last game, 51%. Watkins played a season high for routes, 63. That should continue. We have unders as a value in our projections on Caden Lee. Watkins should work more as a full-time receiver as the season goes on. Tight end, Caden Prescorn, his role's actually been pretty bad. That's because I think they added Daquan Wright, a talented transfer from Virginia Tech. So they don't need to use Prescorn every snap right now. His route rate is 48%. Last game, it was 69, but the game prior was 39. This might just be a matchup thing. We're projecting a slight edge Prescorn's way, but Daquan Wright's not going away. So this is more of a rotation than it previously had been. He's not one of the best values on the slate, but decent game for DFS, all things aside. BYU takes on Baylor. 47 total is not great. It's a 3-point spread, but much better job pricing this week for DraftKings. Some players do pop as values. Jake Retzlaff is not one of them. He is averaging 247.5 yards per game. That is on a very efficient sample, and he's played some relatively difficult schools so far. This team diced up SMU, which was pretty good, and then they had the turnover machine game against Kansas State. I don't know what to make of that. Retzlaff is a little mobile. I don't imagine getting to him. They don't play any sort of pace, 123rd. They'll need to be down in this game, which they are projected to be. It's a 3-point spread in favor of Baylor, but just total's bad. If I get to any Retzlaff, it will just be a sprinkling. The backfield is a complete dice roll right now with injuries. They still haven't seen LJ Martin return. He's doubtful. Hinckley Ropati is more questionable, but he's missed the last 2 games. Enoch Nahawini, I have no idea how to say that. Excuse me, Enoch. He's back, which has rendered this more of a timeshare, but Sion Maua is the lead back, it appears. I just think when you get Enoch Nahawini back to full strength, it's probably more of a timeshare. If Ropati returns, it's more of a timeshare. So I don't have a lot of interest. You're going to have to monitor this until kick. If all these players are out again, Ropati's out again, Moa would be in play at $3,500 on DraftKings, not on FanDuel. This team does have a 50.5% pass rate, which is increased in competitive games. It's basically just Chase Roberts and Darius Lassiter, in my opinion, the players you want to get to. Roberts is the stud alpha. His target share is still only 19%, so you can kind of see they're going to rotate guys. They're going to move players around, get everyone involved. It's not ideal for targeting a stud, but he's by far the most efficient player they have. Darius Lassiter missed their first game, and he's another player who's seen his route rate jump week to week to week. He saw a season high in their last game, and he should be the number 2 receiver pretty locked in. I don't think there's any real concern there. Everyone else rotates. You have Epps, the highest route rate he's achieved any game this season has been 65%. Keelan Marion, 54%. Keanu Hill's been dust. His route rate has dropped 4 consecutive weeks. They run a bunch of tight ends. Parker Kingston's a gadget guy that occasionally gets in there. I'm not playing anyone other than Chase Roberts and Lassiter. The rest of this team is kind of a mess because they rotate. Baylor, again, I don't like Sawyer Robertson, but this is the Brock Vandegrift thing where he's priced so cheap now that he actually does show up a little bit. You have to decide whether there's a ceiling worth playing. I think it is debatable. Their team total is still only 25, but unlike last week where there was, 8 quarterbacks you could consider. This week, with the price floor being down, Sawyer Robertson is somebody you could debate. And that's assuming he starts. DeQuan Finn is questionable. DeQuan Finn has been a bottom 5 quarterback in the entire country across all levels of competition. DeQuan Finn's best trait was supposed to be his mobility is 26 rushing yards. The guy's terrible. Robertson at least gives them maybe slightly below average play. So this is somewhat debatable. I don't know. He projects better than I was anticipating, but I'm still probably not going to get there. Baylor's been bad this year, and they finally did something in the backfield and trimmed the fat. Richard Reese and Dawson Pendergrass played a combined 7 snaps. It's funny, in those snaps, they still had 6 carries. But all the snaps went to Dominic Richardson and Bryson Washington. Dominic Richardson's 3,100. Washington's 45. Dominic Richardson outtouched Washington 16-12 in the game. And while I'm expecting a 50-50 split, if you have a discount at 3,100 for Richardson versus 45 for Washington, I mean, you can slide in Richardson and just play him as your value. Maybe you don't want to play Brock Vandegrift or Sawyer Robertson. Tentatively, Richardson is a pretty decent projection. We have him, at like 9.9 points, and he still comes up some of the time. So I'll definitely sprinkle there. No one in this receiver game has a clear role. No one. Even Michael Trigg, who leads the team in targets, he's got like a 60% route rate. This is just an utter disaster. Baylor has a bunch of bad receivers, and unfortunately, they're just rotating them all. If you did want to pick, I think Keytron Jackson is the best one. His route rate is the most consistent, 85%, 96%, 79%. Second would be Josh Cameron, 65, 100, 71. Third would be Monterey Baldwin, and he's all over the place, 65, 28, 71. He's just a deep threat burner. Trigg has the best role, I guess, target-wise, but his routes are not good. Last 2 games, 56, 62. This is too much time on the Baylor receivers. They're all not any good. That's the other problem, I guess, with Robertson. He has 87 rushing yards, but he had 1 broken scramble against Colorado, which was a career high. So do you stack him with one of these terrible receivers? I don't know. Even though he projects semi-well, I still don't think I'll get there. The game I will be sprinkling is Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and it might even be more than a sprinkle. Kansas State has been woefully bad on defense. They're allowing 8.3 yards per pass attempt, and Oklahoma State is not much better. Oklahoma State is a really bad defense. 5-point spread here in favor of Kansas State. 57.5 total honestly might be too light, and it's taking money, so perhaps this is a little higher by the time it kicks off. Good pace. Oklahoma State is 5th. They have a 63.5% pass rate because Ollie Gordon has been horrible. Kansas State, 77th in pace with a 40% pass rate. That makes sense for them because Avery Johnson's been horrible as a passer. Very good runner. So Bowman's coming off a game he got benched. He did not deserve to be benched. He had 1 turnover where he played 2 interceptions. You can thank his receivers for that. Came back in, is what it is. He's still averaging nearly 300 yards passing per game on 36.5 attempts. He has 7 rushing yards. He's never going to be a guy that gives you a lot on the ground, but he's now cheaper than he was at 7,700. This is a pretty reasonable price tag for Bowman. I don't think he's a strong value or a screaming sell high, anything like that. Just pretty efficiently priced, in my opinion. I'll definitely be stacking him. You can still get some very efficient receiving play. Rashad Owens is too cheap. at 4,500. He had 10 targets in their last game. He has 7 targets per game. Target share is never going to look great for Oklahoma State receivers, but they throw it so much it doesn't matter. Dazon Stribling, he has no fewer than 8 targets in any game this year, averaging 86 yards per game. He's too cheap at 5,800. And Brendan Presley, their alpha, he's averaging 10.8 targets per game, 7,100. I don't imagine he will be the most owned, but if you want to be contrarian and pay up for a guy with a clear ceiling, he does fit the bill. FanDuel essentially has identical pricing to DraftKings in this regard. Rashad Owens just laughably cheap over there. I don't know what's going on with Ollie Gordon. I truly do not. They've been throwing the ball a ton. It's affected him. His carries have essentially dropped in 3 straight games now. He's averaging 21 touches per game still. So Ollie Gordon is definitely still in play. His route rate is amazing. He had 4 targets in the last game, so he's never going to be scripted out. But unlike the quarterbacks, Ollie Gordon is still extremely expensive. He's rushing props at like 79.5 yards this week. So, I mean, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but if you wanted to and just cross-reference props versus DK price, FanDuel price, Ollie Gordon is laughably expensive. Am I nervous about fading him? Of course. He has a ceiling that could absolutely bury you. Last week, he was around 1% owned. If he comes in around that again, I'm probably going to try to go to like 5 and make sure I'm over the field, because there are paths to getting him. I'm just not sure he's going to be the stud people want to click. Avery Johnson is an excellent play, even at 8K. And as a passer, that leaves a ton to be desired. His yards per attempt is below 6. It's been brutal for him as a signal caller throwing the ball, 153 yards per game. However, his mobility has gotten him there. 261 rushing yards this year. That is an awesome number. That's over 50 yards per game on the ground. So if he backdoors his way into any sort of efficient passing, which Oklahoma State has been known to give up, there is a good floor ceiling combo for Avery Johnson. You can play him by himself. You could use a cheaper stack. I don't think it matters a ton. In the backfield, DJ Giddens still has an excellent role, and he has a very good pass catching role too. He's tied for second on the team in targets. He is an 11.6% target share, 17 yards through the air. That gives him a pretty good floor on top of, he's averaging 17 carries per game. He is at 20 touches per game overall, over 100 on the ground. The only real concern is Dylan Edwards has played a little bit more, but emphasis on a little bit. He's basically spiked from like 4 or 5 carries to 6 or 7. It's still Giddens in like a 75-25 split, but Edwards is, you can't play Edwards. He's way too expensive for a guy averaging 7 touches per game. But there is a chance Giddens, if he doesn't have the hot hand, doesn't play as much as you think. I prefer other elite backs to Giddens, but I'm definitely not Xing him by any means. Maryland, Indiana, Big Ten showdown, 51-point total, 7-point spread in favor of Indiana. It's a slow game. Maryland is 67th in pace. Indiana is 109th. The pass rate for these teams, Maryland is at 50.5%, Indiana at 44.5%. Perhaps these teams are so slow because they haven't played anybody. This is the most difficult opponent for either team this season. So Maryland, I think there's a chance they pass more. They had Tagovailoa last year. They passed the ball around like 55, 60% of the time in most games. They now have Billy Edwards. I thought there were a lot of questions on if they would maintain this offense. They're still above 50% despite playing a bunch of cupcakes in Michigan State, who they lost to, and Michigan State's no good. Edwards has a lot of attempts per game, 34. He's averaging 289 through the air. He's been pretty efficient. It's just most of that has come against teams that are awful. 69 rushing yards. He's not a 0 on the ground. They're implied for 22 points. So he's not going to pop. You're going to get like Bowman over him. Could you use him? Sure. It's a volatile game because of the level of competition, but he's not going to be towards the top. Roman Hemby's in a timeshare now, and it's not like a 50-50 timeshare. They're going to use 3 guys. Colby McDonald, Nolan Ray play. Hemby's averaging 14.8 touches per game. He would need to be a little cheaper for me to click. Ty Felton at 7,700 is an absolute monster. He has 600 receiving yards already. He has 15 targets exactly in 3 straight games. Route share, off the charts. Target share, nearly 38%. Caden Prather, still somewhat usable at 4,500. It hasn't mattered. Even with the efficiency projected to be down, Felton has a very, very nice projection. He can't be priced up quickly enough. Prather at 4,500 is honestly a pretty decent buy low too. He's averaging 7 targets per game, hasn't seen fewer than 6, 50 receiving yards per game. That is certainly serviceable. And that's about it. Octavian Smith maybe is a buy low, but he has a 9% target share. He's just your pure wind sprinter. Find the 900 to go up to Caden Prather. Doesn't make any sense playing anyone else in this offense. Tight end, rotation. Backfield again, rotation. Ty Felton, Billy Edwards, or pass. Indiana, Curtis Rourke, averaging 253 through the air, some mobility, 55 yards. He's below his career averages for yards per carry and stuff right now, partially just because I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. All right. Curtis Rourke. So hyper efficient, 253 yards per game through the air on 24 attempts. Just wild efficiency for him so far, largely the product of opponent. But, they played UCLA, diced him up. They're getting more competitive, and they have not slowed down. So I'm fine playing some Rourke. He's not going to project that well, just Indiana playing really slow. 2019 total's not fantastic. It's a low total game overall. He's stackable, though. Elijah Surratt is still not expensive. He's averaging 5.5 targets per game, but a lot of that was slow in the beginning as they beat up on teams. Didn't have a full route rate. That's something to highlight here. Let me pull up Indiana's route rates for you so we can see more competitive games. It has shifted, as you would expect. Surratt in 2 of their games has been at 88% or above, 2 games at 60%. Omar Cooper, similar. He's been down at 45 in 3 straight, so that's not ideal. Honestly, looking at this, it's a pretty nasty rotation in most games outside of Surratt. Keyshawn Williams has seen a slightly increased role. Cross has seen a slightly decreased role. Cooper decrease. And all of this, I think, makes sense. They're just deep at these positions. So I think there's better options than the cheap Indiana receivers. And Surratt, in competitive games, likely has a ceiling he hasn't displayed yet this year. So those would be the guys I'd get to. And, part of this is probably because McCulley was hurt and now he's back. He just adds another receiver to cannibalize the receivers that are sort of in this low price range. Horton at tight end is somewhat interesting. His route share is pretty good. You're looking at around 65% or better in most weeks. Has not been involved in the pass game as much. He has 2 games where he went targetless, but at least worth mentioning, he might just flat out have the second best route rate now that all these receivers are healthy. Backfield, Tyson Lawton leads a committee. Justice Ellison has been way more efficient than him, so don't be surprised if that changes at any point in time. Kalen Black was also hurt earlier in the year. He's back, adding an extra body. They tried to have Elijah Green just be a salt away the game at the end, but he was so efficient. Honestly, they've needed to give him more carries. So disaster run game, not because it's bad. Too many guys for DFS. Minnesota, Michigan. Horrible DFS game. Michigan's implied for 13 points. Wouldn't hate it if you just X'd them out. The game is totaled at 35.5. Michigan's a 10-point favorite. Both these teams are slower than hell. Minnesota 119 in pace, Michigan 132nd. Minnesota's been throwing more. They have a 51.7% pass rate. It reminds me of, like the Tanner Morgan days. So Brosmer, you can't play him. He doesn't run. He's just not efficient enough to play. Darius Taylor's in more of a timeshare than he was last year. Can't play him, in my opinion, at 7,700 in this matchup. Daniel Jackson does have double-digit targets in back-to-back games, but what is the efficiency going to be like? At 5K, I'd rather play Rashad Owens or something. Just like I'm out on Minnesota, and I'm probably out on Michigan. This team had 32 passing yards last week. Orgy's a disaster. He's basically Bryson Barnes. Like he's the Army quarterback. He can't throw. Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards have been fine. Khalil Mullings is running laps around Edwards efficiency-wise, so there being a $300 price gap is laughable. And also, we saw a shift in the route rate last week. It was basically dead even between Mullings and Edwards. That might persist because Edwards has just been so bad. I really wonder if he's dealing with an injury or something because he's been terrible. In the past game, they're projected to get Colston Loveland back. They threw the ball at 17 times last week. You probably are looking at 10, 12 pass attempts this week. Yeah, you just can't play a pass catcher. It's a Mullings or pass for the entire game. Nebraska versus Purdue, 10-point spread in favor of Nebraska, 48 total. Decent pace. Nebraska's 93rd with a 48% pass rate. Purdue, 59th in pace with a 45% pass rate. We'll start with Nebraska. Raiola just takes too many sacks to consider. He has negative 38 yards. I mean, there are games where it's going to be like air raid specific. He might backdoor his way to 300 yards based on attempts. They've had one competitive game. Yeah, I mean, Raiola he's too immobile to really play in DFS right now. He's got to stop taking sacks. He's one scramble, 6 sacks, and he barely ever gets a design rush attempt. Nebraska is a team where the competitors of us have misevaluated their backfield a lot, just not paying attention to their game scripts, because the only time they were really competitive, Dante Dowdle handled a monster workload. That was the same case last week. So hopefully you guys took advantage of that. It's probably going to be something that doesn't fly under the radar anymore. But again, he's coming off a monster workload, 22 touches. Ramir Johnson, the change of pace. He was at 5 touches. He was at 7 touches because he had 3 targets. Gabe Ervin and Emma Johnson aren't playing in competitive games. Flat out 0 not playing. And the big concern with Dowdle was Ramir Johnson was the pass catching back. Last week, they split routes. It was about 30%, 30%. Dowdle had his only 2 targets of the year. This could be another changing of the guard where they're just not going to play these dusty backs in competitive games. Now, that's a concern against Purdue because Purdue's been steamrolled. But again, Purdue's done a lot of that themselves, throwing interceptions that Reggie Love can't catch, drops, kicks in the air, defender returns for a pick 6. Anyway, Dowdle in competitive games, as long as it remains that, should be a workhorse. Receiving game, the props have been coming up on this Nebraska passing game a lot. We've been pretty in line with them. We've been ahead for a little bit this week. And I mean, we just are seeing people under-project Isaiah Neyor and Jamal Banks just flat out. I don't know if they understand that they're not coming off the field. Like, you can project less efficiency for Nebraska's pass game. You can project unders for the quarterback. It doesn't matter. You have 97% of the routes going to Neyor, 90% plus to Jamal Banks. This is a concentrated target share. And it's even like part of the reason I think people mess this up is, again, the blowouts. When games are competitive, it is these 2 guys. The other thing to note here is we're seeing Janiran Bonner lose his job. It's not going to one clear player. Ja'Cory Barney's playing the most, but he's still only at 41.5% of the routes. You saw Jalen Lloyd up at 56%, so it's kind of just 50-50 between those players at the expense of Bonner. Not really too much else to say here. Thomas Fidone, 50 to 65-ish% of the routes. He's just not a big part of the passing game. I wouldn't play him under any circumstance. Banks, Neyor, Dowdle, awesome plays, Raiola passing. For Purdue, Hudson Card still did not project well despite being 5,100. Maybe that's the 19 implied team total. Maybe it's the fact he has 7 rushing yards. Maybe it's the fact he's averaging 150 passing yards per game despite, they've been a negative game script. The backfield's a complete committee. Maccabee versus Love. Neither of them have been efficient. The receiving game is pretty injured. Jamal Edrin is out again, which basically has done nothing but consolidate opportunity for tight end Max Clare. You can definitely play him at 3,900. He has a 22% target share. I don't think I want to get to anyone else. It's kind of been nasty for routes for all the other receivers. Tibbs is maybe your most efficient, 70% of the routes. Denial and Morissette, 60 in their last game. The truth is, Claire was at 95%. No one else was above 70. The answer is probably just Claire and move on. Texas A&M and Arkansas. This is a 6-point spread in favor of A&M. They've taken a ton of money, 52.5 total. Should be a decent pace. Arkansas is 28th. A&M is 89, so they're not slow. Pass rate, Arkansas is 44%. Texas A&M is 36.5. We know the quarterback change has been made on Texas A&M. More on that later. Taylon Green had 3 good games against bad defenses and bad competition. Pine Bluff, Oklahoma State, UAB. Then Auburn really wrecked his day, and he had a terrible game. He runs a fair amount. I would expect it to come down. He has 325 yards. He's averaging 239 as a passer. Again, all of that is inflated by 3 bad opponents. In Oklahoma State specifically, it's their defense. I know they're not a bad team. Volume is decent for Taylon Green. I think there are more options this week where you don't necessarily need to play him. He did not project as well this week compared to last week. And that partially is just going to be team total. You have 23.25 as their team total. And A&M has played reasonable defense. They have shown some cracks in the secondary, but they've gotten better week to week. In the backfield, Jaquindon Jackson has been dominant. when they reduce rushing attempts, I am a little worried just because Taylon Green handles a fair amount as well. But you still have seen Jaquindon Jackson with an absurd role so far this year. Pass catching leaves a little bit to be desired. He only has 5 targets, but I mean, we're talking 2 of the last 3 games, over 20 carries, and he's been efficient. So Jaquindon, you could play as a contrarian piece. Andrew Armstrong has double-digit targets in every game he's appeared this year. He's averaging 116 yards. He's just been better than I thought he would be, so I got to take some L's. No one else has a very significant target share. And the reason Andrew Armstrong isn't at like 30% or something is he missed week 1. The other main receivers are Tyrone Broden and Isaiah Satina. They don't really rotate. Same thing with Luke Haas at tight end. You don't have a ton of rotation for Arkansas. It's just so much of the priority has gone to Andrew Armstrong. It's been surprising. Like Luke Haas, I guess his role is not as good as I thought. 72%, 50%, and 59% of the routes last 3 games. But Satina and Broden haven't left the field. So you could get to them, probably still not too cheap or not cheap enough to really prioritize. Not expecting Wegman to play. He's been working off to the side at practice, which means Marcel Reed should be fine. His stats are skewed by the Wegman game where he left. Marcel Reed is averaging around 175 passing yards per game. He has 173 and 178 in his 2 starts. He has 217 rushing yards. That has come basically all in 2 games. He's been over 80 yards rushing the last 2 games, only taking 1 sack. Marcel Reed is a good value at $7K. Arkansas's defense has been a sieve. They're outside the top 100. I think this is a completely fine matchup to play Reed. The backfield is kind of muddy. Le'Veon Moss leads a timeshare, which also involves Amari Daniels. It's 17 touches per game for Moss, just 10.5 for Daniels. Moss isn't that expensive, so at $6K, I'm willing to get there. Daniels, maybe you could even talk me into 10 touches at that price. But it's not ideal, especially with Reed now taking more of the opportunities on the ground than Wegman was. The receiving game is a mess. They've had injuries, guys in and out of lineups. The routes have kind of been all over the place. I'm not sure what to expect for A&M. Last game, Noah Thomas was at 81% of the routes. And then second was actually their tight end, Trey Watson, at 76%. Third, Cyrus Allen at 66%. Ja'Day Walker, he was at 57. He's been banged up a little bit, so there is a chance he plays more. And then Jabari Barber was at 41%. The only real wrinkle here, I guess, that should be explained is Terry Bussey, whatever you say, is not in the player pool. He's played a fair amount. We have all of this production assigned to Jacob Bostic, who stinks and isn't going to play. It's not enough production where you'll get him, but just know we have accounted for DK's miss and Terry Bussey in the player pool in a way. That is all in the projections. Oklahoma and Auburn, 1-point spread in favor of Auburn, 44.5 total. This was just the slam dunk closing line value spot of the week if you paid attention to what happened in Oklahoma's game last week. And it's not even the switch from Michael Hawkins or Jackson Arnold to Michael Hawkins. It's how many receivers got hurt. Just, I don't know what they were doing pricing this game. Anyway, it's moved to the appropriate price of -1 in favor of Auburn. 44.5 total. Not expecting a lot of efficiency. Defense has been pretty good for both teams, so I get it. But there also is an outside chance it goes far over the total because of pace. Oklahoma's 13th. Auburn's 21st. Both these teams have exactly a 49% pass rate. This could be your greasy over of the week. It's not going to project well. Hawkins appears to be somewhat mobile, and we have no idea as a passer. He was thrown into the fire mid-game against Tennessee and didn't look terrible. He definitely played better than Arnold. So they're still way too expensive to play, in my opinion, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a good game. Let's just put it that way. He's on the scale of like Brock Vandegrift to, I don't know, Carson Beck. I don't think he's as low as like a Vandegrift or something. The backfield's a mess. Taylor Tatum isn't going to play in this game. He got hurt in the last game, which is unfortunate because he was a breath of fresh air for the dusty Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk. Now I would just expect these two to slam into the back of the really hurt O-line again. It's a disaster backfield. No one averaging anything close to efficient play. Hawkins also had 11 designed attempts in his short time on the field, which really cannibalized them. But again, that might just help Hawkins. And the receivers. Here's who's in, here's who's out. Well, let's just do who's out. Jaleel Farouk's been out for the year, broke his foot. Deion Burks got hurt in their last game. Angelo Anthony still can't return from the ACL. Nick Anderson tried to play it, immediately got hurt again. which sets up our 3 wide receiver sets of some combination of Brennan Thompson, Zion Reagans, Jaquez Petaway, and J.J. Hester. I mean, these guys are all cheap as hell. Could you play some of them? Why not? Is it going to matter? I don't know, man. Like, this is a disaster receiving game, as evidenced by the total. Brennan Thompson has to be the number one, just his routes have been high, even when Burks was active. Reagans was up at 67%. Petaway was at 39%, and Hester was at 6.5%. So that's how I would rank them in that order. Thompson, Reagans, Petaway, Hester. Tight end Bauer Sharp is also probably in line for more targets. His routes haven't really fluctuated. But in the game where everyone got hurt, he had 8 targets. So Bauer Sharp at 3,700. I mean, you can kind of spray Oklahoma and get to some studs on this slate. So their whole receiving core is cheap as hell. Peyton Thorne, Hugh Freeze has been a mess, man. So I talked a lot of BS about Peyton Thorne, and I was wrong because I went and dove into the metrics. He has 2 turnover-worthy plays and 5 interceptions. I mean, he just shouldn't have been benched. If the coaching staff was doing their job and evaluating quarterback play, they probably would have realized, oh, these are receivers volleyball setting interceptions to the defense. Peyton Thorne actually put it on target, but he got benched, and Auburn paid for it because their backup actually threw 3 deserved interceptions, gets benched. Peyton Thorne comes back in, plays well. But they said it's a competition this week, so you're going to have to monitor this. I don't know that Peyton Thorne is going to start. If he does, he's in play. He runs the ball far better than Hank Brown. He's been more efficient as a passer. Oklahoma's defense is good, so definitely no slouch, but it's not an expensive tag on Thorne. He would be somebody to sprinkle in lineups. This backfield is more of a committee than a lot of people think. Alston and Jeremiah Cobb play a role. It's still Hunter that leads it. He's a little expensive for my liking at 6,300. In a game like this, it's kind of a disaster. And then receivers, just a complete mess for Auburn. Some players have been in and out of the lineup. Cam Coleman is still hurt. He's playing through it, which hasn't been good for his efficiency. Keandre Lambert-Smith is the only one with a solid route share, and it hasn't even been great. He went from 95% to 65 to 72. Second up is Fairweather at tight end. He's also been all over the place, 70 to 50 to 72. Most of the time, I'm just going to pass altogether, but it's probably Fairweather or nothing just because of price. Lambert-Smith at 5,900 is not something I'm too interested in. TCU takes on Kansas. This game has a 59 total, definitely shootout worthy. 2.5 point spread in favor of Kansas, the home team. Pace differs a lot here. TCU 18th in pace with a 63% pass rate. Kansas is 100th in pace with a 43% pass rate. Hoover is a 300-yard factory for TCU, 41 attempts per game, but 356 yards. He actually has somehow landed on 0 for rushing yards. Between his sacks and his scrambles, he's come out cumulatively at 0, which is pretty funny. But Kansas's defense has been a little more susceptible this year than previous years, even though they returned like their whole secondary outside of their slot. They turned to a transfer die to take care of that. It hasn't worked. But Hoover's diced up better defenses than this, so I think you could use him at 85. No rushing ability is concerning, so if he does take any sacks, that would be a problem. Fortunately for you, Kansas's defensive line is not really that formidable. The backfield, Cam Cook is starting to cede more work to Jeremy Payne, Dominic Johnson, Trey Sanders. He's just been bad. So 47.5 rushing yards per game ain't going to cut it. You're going to see other guys start coming in. I will say Cam Cook has a pretty good pass game role. He's at about 60% of the routes. He has 7 and 4 targets in back-to-back games. I just wish he was a touch cheaper. Sprinkle him, sure. Priority, no. In the receiving game, Jack Betch, Savion Williams, J.P. Richardson, and Eric McAllister have sort of consolidated. Betch is leading the conference in receiving yards, which is a big surprise coming from LSU. But can we use him in DFS? I think contrarian pay up for Betch, sure. His route rate's at like 95% in competitive games. Savion Williams' route rate has dropped. He was at 87% week 1. Last 2 games, he's been in the 60s. Richardson in the 60s. McAllister in the 30s. So it is a rotation between these 3 receivers, and it's not a pretty one. I don't really want to play any of them at their price tags. I think some people might be fooled into getting to McAllister. For me, it's Richardson or pass. Like J.P. Richardson has a better route rate, almost double the route rate of McAllister. Better target share, even over the time where McAllister's played well. Just not really a great situation outside of Betch, and he's very expensive. Even tight ends a rotation. Chase Curtis, Dabney, They're rotating a lot. DJ Rogers is the guy that plays like 12% of the snaps. So kind of tough to get outside of Betch. I would just pay all the way down for Richardson. Jalen Daniels, man. Okay, let's do it. 24 attempts per game, 155 yards, 156 yards, 103 rushing yards. I mean, he's been reasonable in games that are competitive that coax him into a higher pace. He's just been bad. He throws too many interceptions. That's not something that's always been a problem for him, so maybe it changes. But man, he's just flat out been bad. The only thing I'll say is I think he might be left for dead by some people because he doesn't project all that well. I think that's largely the product of his efficiency this year. If you were to throw in like he was hurt all last year, let's throw in like 2022's efficiency, he's going to project a lot better behind this team total, nearly 31 points. So I'll throw some contrarian Jalen Daniels in there. You just have to know that ceiling is there, but you also have to know he's live to get benched because he's been a disaster. And they have a new OC. Perhaps this was Kotelnicki being a wizard and not anything Daniels did individually talent-wise. Backfield, now that we have Highshaw in the mix, it's not going to be all Devin Neal. But with that said, Devin Neal's still too cheap. This team wants to run the ball and take it out of Daniels' hands because he's been so bad. Last game, Devin Neal had 27 carries and 1 target. This team just has a very low pass rate to running backs, but when they do, Devin Neal's on the field a ton. He has about a 60% route rate. So if it ever happens, Neal is in position to catch them. I mean, at 6,600, how do we not play Devin Neal? It's just a very difficult spot to avoid. In the receiving game, people are super hesitant. Also, TCU is allowing 4.9 yards per carry. Goodness gracious. In the receiving game, people don't want to play Luke Grimm. He has a 35.5% target share. 8.5 targets per game. They're not going to throw the ball a ton, but he's a priority, and it's not even really that close. He still projects well at 5,200. And honestly, Arnold and Skinner don't project terribly at 38 and 41 either. Their target shares are far, far lower, but it's a concentrated pass game. No one outside of those threes in double digits. So it's allowed them all to be around 20% and Grimm to have this dominant 35.5% target share. You can stack Daniels, not because he's a prolific passer, but because it is so concentrated. Colorado, UCF, this is a fun game. 62 total, so another potential shootout on this slate. 13.5-point spread in favor of UCF. They have a monster team total. They're priced up, so they're going to need to pay it off. In the game environment stuff, Colorado 19th in pace, 63.5% pass rate. UCF is 60th in pace with a 27% pass rate. They've slaughtered everybody except for TCU. They had a very dumb game plan in the beginning. Tried to treat tried to treat KJ Jefferson like Patrick Mahomes, nearly gave up the game. On defense, they also had a lot of success against TCU, but every time they got TCU behind the chains, you saw them convert some weird long third down to Betch. It was crazy. Anyway, they found a way to come back in the game. I fell asleep in the second half, so I didn't see how they did it. Shedeur Sanders, 40 attempts per game, 10 rushing yards. Let's go, Shedeur. You're no longer in the negatives. I mean, he's live for 300 every single game. It's just tough because even when he gets 300, he's still not really a good value because he doesn't run at all. So those 3 extra points don't really do a ton for you. He's hard to get to, in my opinion. I would rather just play one-offs of his receivers. He did have 12 designed attempts last game. This is weird. I don't know what the deal is, but something worth mentioning. He's athletic, man. He's a pocket passer. He takes a lot of sacks. I don't know what to make of this. Maybe I'm underrating Shedeur Sanders based on this very peculiar one-game sample. I don't know. These are designed attempts, too. It doesn't include sacks or scrambles, just designed attempts. All right. Receiving game, Hunter. I don't know how you pay $10K for Hunter, but, man, he's been good. Honestly, I'd rather just play Ty Felton, have the guy averaging like similar workload, similar efficiency at a fraction of the price. I don't know how you pay this, man. I just flat out don't. Especially when LeJontay Wester, Horn, and Will Shepherd are very cheap. They're all pretty efficiently priced. Even like Will Shepherd, who's averaging 37 yards per game. You know, would you be terribly surprised if he has a good game with Shedeur? He had a 10-target game. At 3,800, are you going to take a random 10-target game? Surely. I'm going to sprinkle all 3 of these guys. Probably not Hunter, though, which is very sad and could be the death of me. We'll see. KJ Jefferson, I don't think he's played anywhere near his ceiling, largely because they haven't needed him to. but he's a player that has very good dual threat ability. He hasn't seen more than 9 design carries in the game, which is also peculiar. I thought they would run him a lot more, but they've gotten such good efficiency out of their backs. Maybe they just don't need to. He hasn't shown a ceiling that makes me very optimistic at 8,900. But, I mean, we've seen some hyper-efficient games from him at Arkansas. So I won't X him out, but I don't imagine I'll get a ton. Harvey, my goodness, 29 carries against, what is this, TCU? Holy smokes. 30 touches because he had the one target. His route rate is quietly very good. And this might have been a spot I overlooked this year, but, I mean, he was a dominant back last year over Richardson. Miles Montgomery comes in from Cincinnati. He changes the pace a little bit. Penny Boone is from Toledo. I mean, he failed at a Power 5 school, then went to a MAC school and came in. Are we really expecting Penny Boone to be a component of this run game, a major one? I don't know, man. Harvey is a monster. You have to pay for him, yes, but as far as studs go, he's one of the ones I want to be exposed to because you just don't see this kind of workload very often. Holy smokes, this is absurd. Also, his route rate was at 55% in this game. Just nuts. I really wonder how Colorado plays Kobe Hudson because you look at the efficiency for these UCF receivers, it is Hudson and everyone else is pure dust. So do they just park Travis Hunter on Kobe Hudson and call it a day? That's what I would do. But he has a 33% target share. That's only amounted to 6.3 targets per game. It's been very efficient, 103 yards against bad competition. But that's a balancing act. The efficiency likely drops. Targets likely rise in those game environments where they're more competitive. I think Hudson's okay. I do really worry about Hunter just being parked on him because Townsend stinks. Jacoby Jones stinks. They don't have any receivers. Javarius Johnson's played a little bit. His target rate is extremely low. Pittman is probably the next best guy, in my opinion. His routes have been quietly very good. Last 2 games, 77%, 83%. Just not super involved. But again, who is? His routes are better than Townsend. They're better than Jones. They're better than Johnson. I don't know, man. I'm honestly considering it. Like, Trent Whitmore has, I think it's the second best route rate on this team, but he has 1 target. This is your win sprinter extraordinaire in college football. This is an award I'm making right now. Trent Whitmore, congratulations. You've won it. You are the best endurance athlete in all college football that doesn't do anything else. Louisville takes on Notre Dame in a pretty fun game. But DFS is not ideal. 45.5 total. Notre Dame is a touchdown favorite. Louisville is 133rd in pace with a 47% pass rate. I have a lot of questions. I don't have any answers, but they're questions. This is a Jeff Brown offense. How are they going to play? They played a ton of different styles. We saw them play air raid early in his career. Then last year, they moved to a little more balanced to run heavy. They've been fast in the past as well. So what is this 133 pace? Is this the product of opponent because they've been in a bunch of cupcakes until last week? I don't have the answers, but it leads to volatility and projections, which means Tyler Shugg might have a ceiling. And people were onto this last week. Credit to them. He was extremely owned. He is averaging 283 pass yards per game, only 15 rush yards on the year. I need to see this offense play more because last year they definitely run their quarterback a ton. We saw that with Malik Cunningham, but surprisingly, Jack Plummer was run a lot more than I ever expected him to, and he's not a mobile guy. Shugg has a strong pass or strong mobility numbers from his pass. He's played all over the place at this point. And he had 6 designed attempts in his first competitive game. So I think we might be projecting Shugg a little bit low. I'm going to be playing him even in a tough matchup. Not a lot, but he's going to be a sprinkle in lineups. Maurice Turner is expected to miss this game again, which has muddied the backfield. We saw 4 guys carry the ball, no one above 10 attempts, just full pass. I mean, it's probably Donald Chaney or pass, but man, 3,200 is pretty enticing now that I look at it. 11 touches at 3,200 against a tough defense? Maybe. Ja'Cory Brooks, he only had 5 targets last game. That's absurd. He had a monster game. It looks like they just didn't throw the ball a lot, which I guess makes sense thinking back to that game. Anyway, 99 yards per game, 26% target share. He's more expensive. Last week at 4,800 was a joke. Now he's 57, so it's more of a question, but I'm still surprised. Chris Bell, his route rate dropped in their most recent game. I think Louisville's just going to kind of do what they did last year. They had Thrash last year, and he was their alpha. Everyone else rotated. Chris Bell was on the field second most last year, and it appears that's the case again this year, but it didn't lead to any production. We saw the Chris Bell route rate drop to 57%. Jaden Thompson was up at 43. Mari Huggins-Bruce jumped 35%. Remember, he wasn't with the team till early this offseason. He left South Carolina, I believe. Yeah, it's just going to be a rotation, I think, outside of Brooks. Notre Dame, Riley Leonard is being very efficient on the ground. This is wild. Every single week I come on here and I say, this efficiency can't persist. Riley Leonard's been bailed out by a long touchdown run, and it keeps happening. He's good at running the ball, so credit where it's due. But, man, he's just gotten a couple long carries this year that have absolutely spiked his fantasy totals. He's averaging 147 yards through the air. This is a run-heavy team. They're 85th in pace, and I don't think they're very well coached. So it's Riley Leonard bailing them out. And part of the reason I don't think they're very well coached, I ran my prospect model on the back end just for fun last night. Someone asked for it in Discord. Who are the top 5 most efficient running backs in college football? Jeremiah Love is on that list. Why is he ceding work to Devin Ford, Jadarian Price, Aeneas Williams? Why? He's averaging 13.3 touches per game. Some of their games, most of their games have been competitive this year. They lost to a MAC team. They were in another game against a MAC team. And, they beat the snot out of Purdue is what it is. 13.3 touches is absurd. Play Jeremiah Love more. Watch the film. Do some analytics on your roster. Don't be stupid, Marcus Freeman. He's been a disaster. Also, the negligence to trot out Bo Collins as your number 1 receiver is laughable to me. Your transfers are Bo Collins. He was horrible at Clemson. Chris Mitchell, this is a guy from a very bad G5 program. Then you have a bunch of failed 4-stars and Jaden Greathouse, Jaden Thomas, Jaden Harrison's a G5 receiver. What is this receiving core? Mitchell Evans is coming off the ACL. So I get it. Riley Leonard is throwing to a bunch of dust. What are we really expecting him to do out there? He has a hurt shoulder as well. If you're stacking him, I think it has to be Evans on the basis that he just plays more. Because he's coming off the season-ending injury, he's nowhere to go but up. But, man, this is a terrible receiver room. I would not be stacking Leonard if using him unless it's with Evans. The problem is he's 4,700. You got no discount. Better on FanDuel at 48. But, man, what a mess Notre Dame is again. Every single year there's optimism. They change OCs all the time. They add 4-star, 5-star recruits. They get the cream of the crop transfer quarterback, and they still have the same offense. It is unbelievable being a Notre Dame fan. Wisconsin USC, this is quietly a very fun game, especially for DFS. 15.5 point spread, 50.5 total. There are Wisconsin guys that pop a little bit. One of them is not Braden Locke, takes too many sacks, terrible passer. But we have a hyper-condensed target share with Will Pauling at 34%. He's 4,800, 9.7 targets per game, nearly 64 yards. Yes, Braden Locke is going to be a little bit worse, but it doesn't matter when your target share is this locked in. I don't think it matters a ton. I still think you could play him. It's not very enticing outside of him, though. Will Pauling, way ahead of other guys. Bryson Green's the 2, but his route rate's about 75%. Everyone else is in a disgusting rotation. And Vinny Anthony has kind of asserted himself as the 3. That is not something you should ever want to say. In the backfield, it is a 50-50 committee between Chez Mellusi and Tawi Walker. I fear that Cade Yakimelli is starting to make this into potentially a 3-way committee. He's been pretty involved. Not to the point where you want to play him individually, but to the point where it almost erases the efficiency that comes from Chez and Tawi. They just don't have enough volume to be sustainable. I do think Wisconsin can have some success running the ball in this game, but I don't know who it goes to, and I don't know if Yakimelli is going to be significantly involved. If he is, I don't have any interest in Wisconsin whatsoever outside of Pauling. On the USC side, their team total is good enough where Miller Moss, who's also cheap enough, could be in play. I think he projects as one of the better values. When I was looking at this, I was a bit surprised because he's a 0 on the ground, negative 28 rushing yards, but 295 passing yards per game. Wisconsin's defense has been a big disappointment, and the volume's there, nearly 40 attempts through the air. He projects well, man. I'm surprised. And he's easy to stack. That's another thing. Some of these stacks are really expensive. USC lost Lake McCree, their second most targeted player, and they lost Mekhi Lennon. He was a very impactful receiver for this team, at the very least, just siphoning routes from other people. So Zachariah Branch saw a route spike, a significant one, and a target spike, up to 11 targets in their most recent game, 90% of the routes for Zachariah Branch. He's way too cheap at $5K for this role if it persists, which they just don't have the talent or the players to potentially siphon some of this away from him. I think 2 and 3 receivers are going to be Kyron Hudson and Jacoby Lane. Tight end is a rotation. Maybe Deuce Robinson plays more, but he's like a weird hybrid tight end. He plays more receiver. Cade Eldridge has actually played a lot of the true tight end stuff. USC also was basically a 4-wide team before this. So maybe you see players like Jay Fair with an increased route roll. I'm not sure. But I do know that Zachariah Branch is the safest, and I would go Hudson and Lane for second most safe. Woody Marks has an excellent role as well. 18.7 touches per game. He's very involved in the pass game, coming off an 8-target performance. Efficient to 90 rushing yards per game, 29 receiving yards per game for Woody Marks. Just an excellent role. Not worried about Joyner. You can certainly play Marks at 7,100. Trying to come away with a piece of USC in most lineups. All right. I believe this ends the DraftKings main slate. Then we'll do FanDuel. Mississippi State, Texas. Mississippi State lost Shapen. They have an 11.5 implied team total. You can X them out for the most part. I wouldn't really play anyone on this team. Maybe a Kevin Coleman Jr. Probably not. Texas. I don't know who we see at quarterback. They're the same price. Honestly, their efficiency has been similar, and Arch Manning runs more, so I would kind of prefer we get Arch. I think you want to pick off pieces of Texas because they have a 50-point implied team total as a 38.5-point favorite. Total is still 61.5 in the game. Mississippi State is first in pace. I don't know if that persists with the new quarterbacks. They're going to platoon Van Buren and Parson allegedly. But man, this could be a slaughtering. I'm interested in Arch Manning or Ewers. I'm interested in Jaden Blue. He had 25 carries in the last game. I'm interested in sprinkling their receivers. Isaiah Bond is 4,800. Now that we've seen this from Texas multiple times. In blowouts, they're just going to rotate these receivers. That's why their route rates are where they are. We actually have it projected pretty close to what you see on the screen in terms of routes. And 4,800 is a lot more appetizing than, like Jaden Blue at 74. But again, I'm going to be trying to play a lot of Texas guys and sprinkling them. The only real wrinkle with Blue is Quintravion Wisner is expected to play in this game. That probably is somewhat mitigated by Velton Gardner being out. I don't really know. It's kind of a mess. But Blue still should be the lead back with Gibson and Wisner handling change of pace stuff. I don't even hate sprinkling those guys, honestly. All right, to the FanDuel slate. We got a couple extra games, 5 of them. Stanford, Clemson. Stanford's a mess. Their backfield is a disaster. Daniel's a bad passer. 22-point spread, so their implied team total just over 17 is not ideal. Alakeo Manor is cheap enough on this site. He has a 30% target share. And Ismail Cisse at 5,700 has a 24% target share, which has risen double-digit targets last game. He's not out of the question. Clemson's Cade Klubnik is way too expensive on the site for me. He's run extremely hot with long touchdown runs, dicing up opponents through the air. I don't think Stanford's any good on defense, so perhaps it happens again. I just would rather pay down at quarterback. It's a very expensive price for him. Maffa is potentially a buy low. He only had 7 carries in the last game, but he got hurt. He came back in the game, fortunately, but prior to that, this team was slaughtering NC State, so they didn't need him. Again, we saw Maffa handle a dominant amount of the carries and touches in week 1 against Georgia. They just haven't been in a competitive game all year, man. If this is the game, Maffa could absolutely blow up. Problem is he's still priced expensively on FanDuel. In the receiving room, we lost Adam Randall, broke his foot. Tyler Brown's questionable. So now Antonio Williams and Jake Brenningstool, I think, consolidate routes a little bit. They're modestly priced. No one is really going to see a monster target share in this offense because you still have TJ Moore and Wesco jumping up in snaps. Salato, for whatever reason, still plays snaps. Turner. They're going to rotate a lot of guys. So even thinning it out with Adam Randall and maybe Tyler Brown, it's still not worthwhile. Illinois, Penn State, 18-point spread, 47.5 total. Illinois is implied for 14.75 points. Altmaier is not cheap enough. The backfield has devolved into a 4-way committee. Caden Fagan is no longer usable. Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant do handle a dominant target share. Zachary Franklin's much cheaper than Bryant, so that would be where I look if you do want to play an Illinois receiver, also 28.5% target share. Drew Aller is still really expensive on FanDuel, man. Every single game, Bo Prabula has either thrown a pass or had a rush attempt, and he's had multiple in every game too. So Aller doesn't play 100% of the snaps. Illinois plays extremely slow. Penn State plays extremely slow. You're going to have to rely on explosives. He gives you a little bit of rushing, but man, I'm just not buying the efficiency that we've seen from Aller. not against a Big Ten team with a decent defense. The backfield, Singleton and Katron Allen should form a 50-50 committee. Cam Wallace has been involved, but he's also questionable for this game. We'll see what happens. Singleton's run laps around Allen efficiency-wise. Perhaps they separate, but that's already factored into price. Number one receiver for this team is tight end Tyler Warren. Let's go tight end U for Penn State. He's still not cheap, or he's still not expensive enough at 7,600, but he's not going to be any sort of screaming value over there. The number two receiver, Harrison Wallace, 3, Omari Evans. Julian Fleming's in a timeshare with players like Liam Clifford. Don't play Julian Fleming. Georgia, Bama, marquee game of the day. Not so marquee for DFS. 1-point spread, 49.5 total. Very slow. Carson Beck at 8,600 is semi-enticing. He just doesn't run very much. Efficiency has not been fantastic this year. It's worse than last year. That could change at any point in time. So I won't rule out Beck, but I won't force him in. Georgia's playing really slow, 124th in pace, but they do throw a lot. That's also how you exploit Bam. They have a freshman starting in their secondary who's been susceptible. Against Kentucky, ETN dominated backfield touches. 19 carries for ETN, 2 targets. If we see a workload like this, he's flat out too cheap at 7,500. Receiving game, we saw this consolidate because London Humphreys got rolled out. He was playing a decent amount. So now I'm expecting the 3 main receivers to be Lovett, Smith, and Bell. Colby Young coming in and rotating a little bit, mainly with Dylan Bell. Oscar Delp had an awesome route rate in the last game. We've just seen really bad play out of Jurasic. So it's kind of been Oscar Delp consolidating 80% of the routes last time out. And then Lawson Lucky playing a little more than expected. But yeah, Oscar Delp, 81% actually. He could be in play as a salary saver over there at the very least. Jalen Milrose, 10K. He has the cheat code on the ground. His rushing yard should be better if not for some crazy holds by a backup offensive lineman against USF. He's extremely efficient as a passer. The numbers don't look great, but they've also been slaughtering teams, so only 17.7 attempts per game. They played Wisconsin, didn't matter, still slaughtered them. Wouldn't make too much out of this backfield split, 9-2. Justice Haynes right there with Jam Miller in terms of snaps, and they talked about this from the coaching staff talked about it in the postgame, asked why Justice Haynes didn't have his same role, even though his snaps were the same, and DeBoer basically just said there were a lot of RPOs, small sample size. On the RPOs where Justice Haynes was in the game, a lot of them got checked into passes. Basically told us to relax. Receiving room, Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard are the number 1 and 2. They're okay on FanDuel. Bernard is much cheaper. Prentice has not been playing a lot. I don't know why his props are so high. It just doesn't make any sense if you actually look at the routes. Guy's like a 30% player. Splits time with Odom, Henderson, Kendrick Law. I mean, why are we even playing Kobe Prentice? I'm either playing Williams or Bernard or just passing on Alabama's passing game. Ohio State, Michigan State, 23.5 point spread in favor of Ohio State, 48 total. Ohio State is an awesome team total. Howard hasn't run yet. He hasn't needed to. I wonder if it's still in there. I'm not sure. Pass game, just fine. Michigan State's been a disaster, so you could still dice up this team and end up with 300 yards, not even blink with Howard. Judkins and Henderson, eventually this will consolidate. I don't think James Peoples is going to be a big part of this backfield. Judkins has been running laps around Henderson efficiency-wise, so I think this is probably like a 60-40 split rather than 50-50. And these receivers have so much room to grow. They've been slaughtering teams. You look at their route rates. This is where people have gotten things wrong. You know, like I'm not projecting Ibuka for 57% of the routes in this game. I'm not even projecting him for 67. If you think this plays to the spread, Ibuka is going to be on the field at least 85% of the time. Jeremiah Smith, same thing. Carnell Tate, same thing. These guys aren't going to come off the field much. So when you see like a 300-yard prop or like a 270-plus yard prop for Will Howard, and then you see like 50 yards for these guys, like mathematically, it doesn't make sense. These should be all pretty good plays on this slate. Carnell Tate's actually played the most. 6,200 is a cheap price tag for him. Very interested in all the Ohio State receivers. I'm not interested in Aiden Childs, even at 6,900. My God, he's been bad. He runs a little bit, but this is a mess, man. Michigan State is one of the worst offenses in the country right now. Childs has been bad. Nate Carter's been iced by Karen Lynch-Adams, but not enough where I want to play him individually. He's cheap on DraftKings, FanDuel. I'd rather go somewhere else. The receiving room, they are getting back Jerron Glover, who was their wide receiver 2 before injury. So that leaves Monterey Foster, Jerron Glover, and tight end Jack Velling as the guys we know that are locked in. Wide receiver 3, we don't know because Nick Marsh is questionable and Antonio Gates is questionable. Antonio Gates is just a rotational guy anyway. Isaiah Johnson would probably be the 3 if we saw Marsh and Gates miss again, but dicey situation, not cheap enough, especially when you got like Glover at 51. Just find the 300 or don't play this game. Last one, Florida State, SMU, 6-point spread in favor of SMU, 46.5 total. DJ Uiagalelei has not been benched. Unbelievably, he's the only QB that's played a snap or thrown a pass. What in the world? He's 6,500 on FanDuel. That's incredible. He doesn't have any rushing yards this year, -3, averaging 210 through the air. It's just not a ceiling to play. Even when a guy's this cheap, if he has no chance at a ceiling, what are we doing? They're really hurt at running back. Roydell's out. Lucas is out. Toafili had 17 carries because of that. 3 targets, so 20 touches. That's reasonable. They're still big underdogs against SMU, so I don't love it. The receiving room is a nasty rotation. Morlock plays the most. Guy drops an incessant amount of passes. Benson and Douglas are the 1-2 if you force me to pick one, but like Hakeem Williams missed some time early in the year. He's back, siphoning routes from players. Just a mess. Kevin Jennings, man, this guy now taking over for Preston Stone, runs a good amount, 137 yards on the ground. I'm fine with him at 7,800. The backfield is a disaster. Jalen Knighton is out. LJ Johnson suffered a concussion. He now has 7 days to get ready in this game. We have him projected out with the nature of the injury being a concussion. They just don't have anybody to play alongside Brashard Smith. You're probably looking at like 20 to 25 touches. This guy's a former receiver from Miami, so he can catch the ball. Efficient, 95 yards per game on the ground. Brashard Smith's a good play, even at price. And the receiving game's a complete mess. They just rotate everybody. Even RJ Maryland, he had the good week 0, hasn't been able to consolidate. Nobody above 18% of the targets, only 2 people above 15. Full pass. That will do it. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Reach out on Twitter. I'm at Matt_Gajewski. Back again next week. Until then, good luck, everyone. We will see you later.